In this presentation, I will demonstrate the use of frottage. As an art-making technique, frottage was developed by Max Ernst in drawings made from 1925. Frottage is the French word for rubbing. Ernst was inspired by an ancient wooden floor where the grain of the planks had been accentuated by many years of wear. Influenced by surrealism, the patterns of the graining suggested strange subconscious imagery. Ernst published a collection of these drawings the following year titled Histoire naturelle. One of the plates from that collection, which was printed using a high-end photo reproductive technique called collotype, is shown here. You can see the ways in which he's using different textural areas to create the forms. In this work, he's assembled leaves to form a visual element on the right, but also implies perspective despite the flatness of the textures and surfaces. He also masks out areas of the rubbing in order to juxtapose figure and ground relationships and so forth, as is shown in this one, the habitat of leaves. There's also a long history of the use of rubbings made from Chinese inscriptions on stone slabs or pillars known as stelae. Over time, the use of rubbings were also made from engraved bronze vessels, ancient mirrors, jades, grave markers, lacquerwares, and ink stones. So the supplies that I'll use for this demo today include white mulberry paper, although you can use common 24-pound computer paper and so forth. Mulberry is especially good because it's very thin and it has a long fibers in it, so it's very durable. I'll be using a 6B graphite stick. You could also use a 6B pencil. 24-pound paper you'd use for regular computer printing, as well as masking tape. So the materials I have to show frottage here are a sheet of mulberry paper, an additional 11 by 17 inch sheet of computer paper. The key thing that I'll be using is a graphite stick, 6B. I've also got a couple soft pencils, and then a collection of things that can serve as rubbings. They could be leaves, various objects that have textures, and so forth. One thing I wanted to show you is that I've taken just a simple piece of tag board and made a series of X-Acto marks in it to produce a texture. So even the things that I'm making the rubbing of don't necessarily need to be found objects. So one of the key things to controlling frottage is to consider the use of paper stencils. So on this cutting mat, using an X-Acto blade, I'm going to make a simple paper stencil here. And for example, I can take this in its two parts, set one part aside, put the other part composed onto the mulberry paper as a stencil, and then I'll take some masking tape. And to do this, I like to remove some of the stickum off the tape. You could put it on a pant leg or something like that, and just use a little bit of that to hold the stencil in place. So now I can do a rubbing of a surface using this paper as a stencil for the mulberry. So the other thing is with the graphite stick, it's good to rub it on a sheet of paper a little bit before you use it, but the broad side of it will allow you to rub in a way that it's not necessarily about the pencil marks, but about the broad side of the tool itself. And you can make darker areas by rubbing more and closer to the stencil. So a lot of simple principles of figure and ground are going to play into this. Using the harder 6B pencil, I can also build up a little bit around these edges too. So it is a kind of printmaking meets drawing here a little bit. I could also place this over something else. So, for example, I have one of these Indian teak blocks. If I put this here, this will produce some more area. So sometimes the kind of blending of a couple textures or even the same texture blended on itself can produce some interesting results. So there's all sorts of things you could find. Look in the kitchen. It has all sorts of different things that are textural, from spaghetti measuring devices to backs of spoons and so forth. So once I've built an area sufficiently for that, sometimes what I'll do here is I could make a little mark for myself here and here as a little bit of a guide. I'm going to see this here and here. But carefully remove the tape. That's why I try to get some of it, stick them off of it. And here, get the idea. So now I've got this sort of shape and area here. I'll pull out another piece of paper just so you can see what this looks like here. Better of an idea of what's on that mulberry paper. So the other element, so there's other choices and elements here. So for example, I also have this piece. I can also, for example, take my X-Acto and make this as a stencil area, right? So to do this, I can put my piece of mulberry down on this surface. Use a little more of that tape. Stick them off. Put it on the legs of my shirt or something like this to get that off a little bit. And then put the other one here. Oops. Wrong way. Yeah, that's right. So I've masked that out. I've got this one to mask out. Sorry, this goes this way. In this case, all I simply need to do is place this here. Use some more of that tape. So you kind of want to go into this with a little bit of a game plan. So here, I could, for example, come back in and use this again, or choose some other texture. I'm just going to limit the tools I'm using here so you can see the possibilities of what you can do with just a few tools. Switch this X number of degrees. Make it kind of shadow side on this form. I'll work it around the edges a little. Because the mulberry paper is very translucent, you can also use it without the paper stencils, but I suggest using a paper stencil to begin with as a way to kind of control some of the parts of the composition. So now we're beginning to see that form take shape here. A few other things you can do are just to use any number of other things that have textural elements. So, for example, I can take something like a tongue depressor. It's wood texture. Have a series of these things. Just with one form, I could repeat it. These can be some additional visual elements. The interest for Ernst was that sort of discovery of something unexpected, the sense that this was appealing to the subconscious. What are these shapes coming in here? Another thing that can be useful are just lids or physical things like that. Sometimes when I'm doing something like this, I may just try to hold it on one end. I don't want that to shift. The more you practice with this, the better feel you'll get for it. So you can have an element like that. But even for here's a bit of wooden type. Oi, it says. So here you have some ways of thinking about how to use frottage. You can always rub a flat surface with a 6B pencil to kind of augment it. Here I might put a little bit of a cast shadow on the bottom of it, sort of come back in, a little bit of drawing to enhance the visual result. But it's also a fun challenge to treat this as its own kind of mark making system that's going to be different from the other ones. So I hope you find this useful and helps to give some insights into some ways you might use frottage as a kind of mixed media printmaking drawing method.